Vora, the fierce alien general from the planet Sci-fi, stood tall with an air of arrogance that commanded respect. Her reputation for strength and power was unmatched, and her people revered her for her ruthless leadership. But today, everything was about to change. Today, the Alien Council had sentenced her to an unimaginable punishment, marriage to a human. The Council, in their infinite wisdom, believed that forcing her to marry one of the inferior species would break her pride, humiliate her, and make her reconsider her actions. Vora had no choice in the matter. The law of Sci-fi was ancient, and its punishments were not meant to be questioned. "I can't believe this," Vora muttered under her breath as she stood before the council chamber. Her sharp gaze darted around, taking in the alien faces that surrounded her. Their smug expressions made her blood boil. They thought they had won. They thought this punishment would break her. The council's leader, a tall, slender alien with 6 arms, spoke with a smug tone. "Vora, you have been found guilty of the most serious offense in our society. Your punishment will be to marry a human. This will teach you humility and serve as a reminder of your place in the universe." Vora clenched her fists. The idea of marrying a human, a species she deemed weak and unworthy of attention, was insulting. But there was no arguing with the council's decision. She had no choice but to comply. In her mind, she imagined how this would play out. She would marry the human, play along, and then return to her duties, untouched by this insignificant punishment. She would not allow herself to be broken by something as trivial as a human marriage. The council's representative handed her a small holographic device. "This is your designated human. His name is Derek. He is a simple engineer. Your marriage will take place tomorrow." Vora stared at the hologram. Derek was nothing special. He appeared to be an average human, with unremarkable features. He had short brown hair, a pair of glasses, and a confused look on his face, as if he didn't even know what was going on. Vora scoffed. This would be easier than she thought. The next day, Vora met Derek for the first time. He was exactly as the hologram had shown, clumsy, disoriented, and completely out of place. He seemed to shrink in her presence, intimidated by her towering figure and the fierce aura she exuded. But she wasn't here to break him, she was here to fulfill her punishment. "You're Vora, right?" Derek asked, his voice shaky. It's nice to meet you, I guess." Vora didn't respond immediately. She crossed her arms, sizing him up. His eyes were wide with nervousness, and he kept adjusting his glasses, clearly uncomfortable. She found it almost amusing. How could someone so weak be a threat to her? She was a general, a warrior, feared by beings across the galaxy. This human was nothing more than a nuisance. "Yes, I'm Vora," she said curtly, rolling her eyes. "I assume you're the human I've been ordered to marry." Derek blinked. Yeah, that's me. But I don't think we need to do this, right? I mean, we can figure out some other way." Vora raised an eyebrow. "You don't get to question the council's orders. You're here because they decided it." He fidgeted awkwardly. "Well, I guess I don't have much of a choice either, huh?" "No, you don't," Vora replied, her voice cold and indifferent. "But I don't see the point in dragging this out. We'll marry, and then we'll move on with our lives. I have no interest in you, human." Derek nodded, clearly nervous but trying to maintain a sense of composure. "I guess that's fine. I mean, I've never been married before, so this is, well, new. But if you say so." The ceremony that followed was as awkward as expected. Vora stood stiffly at the altar, her gaze fixed on the ground as the strange human rituals were performed. Derek looked equally uncomfortable, fumbling through the steps. When the officiant instructed them to exchange vows, Vora simply muttered a few words, her voice as flat as her expression. Derek, on the other hand, said something that made Vora almost laugh. Well, I don't really know what to say here. So, I'll just go with. I promise not to mess up too much." Vora rolled her eyes. It was absurd. How could someone so ordinary, so insignificant, be her partner in this farce? She couldn't help but wonder how the council thought this would teach her any kind of lesson. This human was hardly even worth her time. But then, as the ceremony concluded and they were declared married, something unexpected happened. As Derek reached to touch her arm to guide her out, the instant his fingers made contact with her skin, a strange jolt shot through Vora's body. It wasn't pain, but it wasn't something she had ever experienced before. A surge of energy, a power she couldn't explain, rushed through her veins, causing her to gasp. Derek, clearly startled by her reaction, pulled his hand back quickly. Are you okay?" Vora blinked, still trying to make sense of what had just happened. Her heart raced, her skin tingled, and she felt different. Stronger, in a way, but also confused. I'm fine," she said, her voice shaky for the first time in years. She took a step back, trying to hide the sudden vulnerability she felt. "What was that?" "I don't know," Derek said, looking just as confused. "Maybe I shocked you or something." "I didn't mean to." Vora shook her head, dismissing the thought. It had nothing to do with him. It had to be some kind of malfunction, some glitch in her biology. After all, humans were nothing more than weak, fragile creatures. There was no way his touch could have affected her like this. But deep down, she knew it wasn't a glitch. There was something different about Derek, something that was beginning to stir something inside her, something that threatened to upend everything she had ever known. Vora's pride may have been wounded, but her journey with Derek was just beginning, and it was one that would change everything she thought she knew about power, weakness, and the human race. Derek's awkwardness wasn't a facade, it was real, and it had a magnetic charm that Vora couldn't deny. She could see it now, he wasn't just a human, he was different, and something about him was drawing her in. It wasn't his looks, he wasn't exactly handsome, at least not in the way she had imagined. He didn't have the chiseled features of the warriors she had once fought beside. In fact, Derek looked like he'd spent more time with a wrench than with any weapons, but somehow, that very fact made him stand out. His unrefined demeanor only seemed to push the right buttons in her, sparking a reaction she hadn't expected. Still, she couldn't fully admit it, could she? That a human could be more than just a nuisance. No. That would mean losing face, something she couldn't afford, not even in the privacy of her own thoughts. And yet, every time he touched her, even unintentionally, there was that strange, tingling feeling, a pulse of energy that ran through her like electricity. She had never felt anything like it before, certainly not from anyone other than her own species. "Are you sure you're okay?" Derek asked again, his voice still laced with concern as he glanced at her, worried that his touch had caused more harm than intended. "Stop asking that," Vora snapped, trying to regain her composure. Her usual indifference was fading, and she couldn't understand why. She had to stay focused, remain the unshakable general she'd always been. This human wasn't going to break her, he couldn't. But something deep inside her knew that this wasn't about Derek. This wasn't about him at all. It was about her, her own pride, her own understanding of power and control, and how everything was suddenly being thrown out of whack. She crossed her arms, glaring at him as though the very act of doing so might restore some order. "I'm fine. It's just unexpected." Derek took a step back, his face flushed, clearly uncomfortable with the tension building between them. It was as though the world around them had turned into a fog of confusion, a chaos neither of them had expected to find themselves in. "Right. Unexpected. Yeah, I get that," he muttered. He ran a hand through his hair nervously, then added, does this mean we're married now?" The question caught Vora off guard, but only for a second. She quickly regained her stoic facade. "Yes. That's how it works in this diplomatic arrangement," she said, trying to sound more authoritative than she felt. She hated the way her voice trembled for just a brief moment. Derek looked down at his hands, obviously thinking something through. Then he glanced at her, his face reddening. "Well, I didn't exactly think I'd be doing this when I woke up today. Marrying an alien general. I thought I'd just be fixing ships, or maybe helping with some mechanical stuff. But here I am." He laughed nervously. His nervous laugh was disarming, and Vora found herself staring at him for a moment longer than she intended. Why did this human have this effect on her? His awkwardness, his lack of pretension, it was, dare she admit it, endearing. "Derek," she began, clearing her throat to keep her voice even, "this marriage is nothing more than a formality. A punishment. You'll do what's expected, and I'll survive it." The words were forced, but she said them with an edge that she hoped would settle things. "Right. I'll do my part," Derek agreed, his tone more resigned now than before. "But, just out of curiosity, what exactly are you expecting from me in all this? Because if it's real marriage stuff, I'm not exactly prepared for that, Vora." He chuckled nervously again. Vora couldn't help herself. His vulnerability was something she hadn't anticipated, and while it was irritating, it was also, oddly human. She found herself answering, albeit reluctantly, "Expect nothing more than a formal union. It's not about feelings. It's about complying with a council order." Derek nodded, still unsure, but willing to go along with it. "Okay, got it. No feelings. But, if you ever need help with something, don't hesitate to ask." "Help?" Vora raised an eyebrow, the word sounding absurd to her. What could a human do to help her? She was Vora, the most feared general in the galaxy, a being whose strength and power were beyond measure. But then, the moment Derek had touched her, something inside her had shifted. The power was subtle, but it was undeniable. She couldn't explain it. Was it a side effect of their bond, of their marriage? Or was it something more? Could Derek have unlocked something within her, something that even she had never been aware of? "Don't worry about it," she snapped, though the edge in her voice had softened, if only slightly. "I'm fine." The next few days were a blur of uncomfortable interactions. Vora did her best to distance herself from Derek, but every time he was near, that strange energy pulsed through her again. She couldn't focus, couldn't ignore the way he made her feel, like he was some kind of anchor to a reality she had no desire to engage with. "Vora," Derek said one evening, when they were alone together in the chamber they now shared, "are you sure everything is okay? You seem off." Vora took a deep breath, clenching her fists to regain her composure. "I'm fine, Derek. I don't need your concern." But deep down, she knew she was lying. She had never been one to show weakness, but Derek was forcing her to confront things she wasn't ready to face. Her self-assurance, her pride, everything that had made her the powerful general she was unraveling, piece by piece, and it terrified her. Derek moved a little closer, then hesitated. "Well, I'm just saying, if you need someone to talk to, don't." Her voice was sharp, but something flickered in her eyes. Why did this human have to keep offering these things that made no sense? He didn't push her further. Instead, Derek dropped the subject, though a spark of curiosity in his gaze remained. He didn't understand why she was so angry, but he had already learned one important thing in their brief interactions: he could never expect the answers from her that he wanted. Vora was a wall, and it seemed that no matter how many times Derek touched it, whether with his clumsy attempts at comfort or through his sincere, awkward gestures, he would never break it. At least, not the way the council had intended. But what if it wasn't about breaking her? What if it was about changing her, in ways she couldn't yet understand? Every touch felt like it was pushing her closer to a truth she wasn't ready for, a truth that was hidden beneath the layers of her pride, her strength, and her armor. And for the first time in a long while, Vora wasn't so sure about the future anymore. Vora had never imagined a life like this. Standing side by side with Derek, the human she had been forced to marry as a punishment, felt odd. It wasn't the power she was used to, the sharp, calculated control that had always come naturally to her. No, this was something else entirely. Something she had not prepared for. And no matter how hard she tried to keep it under wraps, Derek's presence seemed to affect her in ways she couldn't control. The strange surge of energy that had coursed through her every time their skin had touched, it was growing stronger. Vora couldn't deny it anymore. There was something about this human, this inferior creature, that had unlocked a hidden potential within her. But what scared her more than anything was that Derek seemed unaware of it. He wasn't trying to manipulate her, wasn't trying to take advantage of her newfound abilities. In fact, he seemed blissfully unaware of just how much his presence had affected her. He wasn't interested in power. He was just trying to survive this bizarre situation. "Okay, so this is weird," Derek said one morning, breaking the silence between them. They were sitting at a table in their shared quarters, Vora reading over some documents that she hadn't quite managed to focus on. Derek, on the other hand, was fiddling with a strange gadget he had found in the corner. "I mean, I never expected my day to involve marrying an alien general. And I sure as hell didn't think I'd be sitting here trying to figure out what's going on with you." Vora didn't answer at first, too absorbed in her thoughts to even acknowledge his words. Derek's bluntness had an odd way of drawing her back to reality, even though it irritated her to no end. How could he be so casual about everything? Didn't he realize the magnitude of their situation? He had no idea who she was, what she was capable of. Finally, she looked up at him, her gaze sharp. "You don't need to understand anything about me," she said coldly. "You're here to follow the council's orders, nothing more. Don't get any ideas." Derek shrugged, the casual movement somehow both irritating and disarming. "Well, I don't really want to understand you, Vora. You're a lot to handle. But you're still different, you know?" Vora felt a strange twist in her chest, something she couldn't quite place. It was too soon, she told herself. She was a soldier, cold, detached. She had no room for feelings, no time for emotions, especially not over something as ridiculous as a human. And yet, Derek's words kept echoing in her mind. "You're different." It was a simple observation, but for some reason, it felt like a challenge. Was it because she was a general? Was it because she was the one in power, and he was simply some odd, unremarkable human who wasn't supposed to matter? But the truth was, Derek had a knack for getting under her skin, and it irritated her in ways she didn't fully understand. He was human, and yet his touch had changed her, had unlocked something in her she hadn't known was possible. She should have been angry, should have pushed him away, but the more she tried to ignore it, the more it gnawed at her. "Derek, I don't know what you think is happening here," she finally said, trying to regain her authority. "But don't think for a second that I'm going to let you change anything. I'm still in control." "Right," Derek replied, not looking at her as he continued to fiddle with the device. "You're in control." "Got it. But, you know, if you don't want to be around me, I can always just go back to fixing things, or I dunno, maybe I could go on a mission or something." He paused for a moment, then added, "But I'm still trying to figure out what you're really feeling." "What I'm feeling?" Vora shot him a look of disbelief. "You don't get to question what I feel." "I don't feel anything." Derek finally turned to look at her, his expression one of confusion mixed with a hint of understanding. "Yeah, right," he muttered. "But you are feeling something. I can see it in your eyes, even if you don't want to admit it." The words hit her like a blow to the chest. She had always prided herself on her ability to remain calm, to keep her emotions in check. Yet, here was this human who, by all rights, should have been insignificant, calling her out. His casual observation felt like a sharp reminder of how much she had already begun to change. "Stop it," Vora said through gritted teeth. "You don't know anything about me. You're just a human, and you think you can figure me out? You're nothing compared to me." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. Derek might have been just a human, but there was something about him, something about the way he didn't try to control everything, that was slowly pulling her in. He had no agenda. No grand scheme. He wasn't trying to use her. He wasn't trying to change her. He was just there. And that, in itself, made him more powerful than any of the warriors she had ever known. "Fine, whatever," Derek said with a shrug, clearly unfazed by her sharp tone. "But I'm still gonna be here, so you can stop pretending you don't care. I'm not going anywhere." Vora opened her mouth to retort, but she couldn't find the words. Her mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts, each one at odds with the other. She had always been the one in control. She had always been the one who held the power, who made the decisions. But now, Derek's mere presence was causing cracks in that foundation. She was beginning to question everything she thought she knew about herself and about power. "What's happening to me?" she muttered under her breath, more to herself than to Derek. Derek didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood up and walked over to her, reaching out in an almost hesitant way. Without thinking, Vora flinched slightly, her muscles tensing in response. But Derek's touch never came. "Look, I don't know what's going on with you," Derek said softly, "but I'm just trying to help. If you need space, I'll give it to you. If you need someone to talk to, I'll listen. I don't want to make things worse for you, Vora. I swear." The sincerity in his voice struck her, and for a moment, Vora felt something, a vulnerability that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She could feel the walls she had spent so long building slowly crumbling, but she refused to let herself acknowledge it. "Not yet." "You think you can help me?" she asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "You're a human. What could you possibly know about me?" Derek shrugged again. "I don't know. But I'm here. That's all I've got." Vora stood there, her mind reeling. She had always been the one to give orders, to command. But here she was, standing in front of a human who had done nothing but stumble his way through everything, and somehow, he had unlocked something in her that she wasn't prepared for. Something more than just the power she had wielded her entire life. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized something that terrified her more than anything else. Derek wasn't just affecting her physically. He was reaching places she thought were long buried, and no matter how hard she tried to push him away, she couldn't stop the inevitable. Something had changed. "Why are you still here?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Derek looked at her with an expression that was at once both gentle and understanding. "Because I'm not going anywhere, Vora. I'm right here, whether you like it or not." Vora's chest tightened as she felt that strange energy surge again, but this time, she didn't pull away. Instead, she let it happen, letting herself feel the full force of it. It was terrifying, but it was also, oddly freeing. And as much as she hated to admit it, she couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of something entirely new. The next few days were a blur of conflicting emotions, and no matter how hard Vora tried to keep her distance from Derek, it became increasingly impossible. The strange energy that coursed through her body whenever they were near each other had become almost unbearable. She had tried to ignore it, tried to push it down, but it was always there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the next moment their hands would brush or their eyes would meet. At first, she had convinced herself that it was just some weird, biological reaction. A result of her forced marriage to a human, something temporary, something that would pass. But it hadn't passed. In fact, the more time she spent with Derek, the stronger it became. The touch of his hand, the sound of his voice, even the way he smiled, everything about him was starting to affect her in ways she couldn't control. "Vora, what's going on with you?" Derek asked one evening as they sat together in their shared quarters. His voice was calm, but there was an underlying concern that made her feel vulnerable. "You've been acting distant for days. You don't have to pretend like everything's fine." Vora's fists clenched, and she quickly looked away, trying to hide the frustration that was building inside her. "I'm fine, Derek," she replied, her tone clipped. "Don't waste your time worrying about me." But Derek wasn't fooled. He had seen the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention. He had seen the subtle shifts in her posture, the way she seemed to tense up whenever their fingers brushed, even when she tried to act like nothing was happening. He could feel the tension in the room, a palpable force that neither of them could ignore anymore. "Look, Vora," Derek said, his voice gentle but insistent, "I know you're not fine. Whatever's going on between us, you need to deal with it. You're not some cold, unfeeling alien warrior. You're a person. And if you can't talk to me about it, at least talk to someone." Vora's gaze snapped to his, her eyes blazing with a mix of anger and fear. "I don't need anyone," she snapped. "Especially not you. You're a human. You're nothing compared to me." The words hung in the air like a slap, and for a moment, Derek didn't speak. He didn't retreat or back down. He just stared at her, trying to gauge what was really going on inside her. He didn't understand the layers of pride and pain that were tangled up in her, but he could see it. He could see that beneath all her bluster, beneath the walls she had built around herself, there was someone struggling to keep control, someone who didn't know how to let go. "Fine," Derek said finally, his voice soft. "But I'm not going anywhere, Vora. You can shut me out all you want, but I'm still here." Her chest tightened at his words, and for a split second, she thought she saw something in his eyes, a quiet determination, an understanding that neither of them could put into words. It made her stomach twist. She wanted to push him away, to shove him out of her life completely, but a part of her knew it was pointless. Derek wasn't like the others. He wasn't intimidated by her power, and for some strange reason, that made her feel exposed. For the first time in what felt like forever, Vora allowed herself to think about what this all meant. She had always been the one in control. She had built her life around that control, her position, her authority, her reputation. But now, it was slipping away, bit by bit. Every touch from Derek, every interaction, was unraveling the very things that had defined her. "You don't understand," she whispered, barely audible. Derek leaned forward, his voice quiet but firm. "Maybe I don't. But I'm trying, Vora. I'm trying to understand you." Vora's heart skipped a beat. The words echoed in her mind, and for the first time, she didn't have an answer. She couldn't push him away this time. She couldn't act like nothing was happening, like her world wasn't shifting beneath her feet. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice tight with emotion. "What do you want me to say?" Derek hesitated for a moment before answering, his gaze unwavering. "I want you to stop pretending, Vora. I want you to admit that you're feeling something, whatever it is. I can't help you if you won't let me in." Vora stood up abruptly, the force of the movement making the room feel smaller. "I'm not some emotionally broken human. I don't need help." Her voice was rising now, her anger flaring. "I am the general of Sci-fi. I have led armies, crushed my enemies, and you think you can help me?" Derek didn't flinch, though the frustration in his eyes was clear. "Maybe I can't help you in the way you want, Vora. But I can help you be real. I can help you stop running from whatever's inside you. It's not a weakness, you know. Feeling, it's not a weakness." She turned away, not wanting him to see how badly his words were hitting her. How much they were cutting through her carefully constructed defenses. She had always been untouchable, impervious to emotions. Now, for the first time, she felt fragile. Exposed. "Leave me alone, Derek," she said, her voice cracking as she turned her back to him. "Please." But Derek didn't leave. Instead, he stood up and walked to her, slowly but deliberately. "I can't leave you alone, Vora. Not when I see you struggling like this. I'm here. And whether you want it or not, I'm not going anywhere." There was a long silence between them, a tension that seemed to stretch across the room. Vora felt it coil in her chest, like a pressure that was threatening to explode. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know what to feel. She wanted to deny it, to push him away, to tell him that this was all a mistake. But in the depths of her mind, she knew the truth, she was tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of fighting against something she couldn't control. She had spent so long building up walls, and now, for the first time, they were starting to crumble. And it scared her. Derek reached out, slowly, cautiously, as though sensing her internal battle. His hand hovered near hers for a moment before finally resting gently on her arm. The moment his skin touched hers, that same jolt of energy surged through her body again, but this time, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt different. Calming, almost. Vora's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, She didn't pull away. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, feeling the weight of the moment, the weight of everything she had been trying to ignore. "I don't know what's happening," Vora whispered, her voice trembling. "But it's not just you." Derek didn't reply. Instead, he simply squeezed her arm gently, as though telling her that it was okay. That it didn't have to make sense. And for the first time in a long time, Vora let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to have all the answers. Maybe, for once, she could just feel.